what's your name?
My name is, I'm legally Margaret Ann. My parents always called me Peggy Ann as a first name, no middle name. So I'm really Peggy Ann Zuber, Z-U-B-E-R, Unger, two German names. My dad was Colonel Zuber. He was commander of the Marine Barracks here on Ford Island. And we were the only Marine family on the island. I mean, you know, the children. Mm-hmm. There were non-coms living in cottages that were on down here on the other side of the school.
Okay. And you have one sister, correct?
I have one sister. She's 14 months younger. And her name is Jo. It's spelled J-O-A-N, but my parents called her Joanne. Joanne Christine Earle, E-A-R-L-E.
Okay, perfect. How old were you on December 7th?
I was 11 years old.
And you would have been in the 5th grade, 6th grade?
I was in the 6th grade, and we were supposed to go to Punahou, which was a big deal, when we got to the 6th grade, and they decided to extend it for one semester. So we didn't finish that semester here on the island, so obviously I never went to Punahou.
Okay. Which school did you go to?
It was Kenneth Whiting. It was a school right here on the island. I hope I've got the right name because I've gone to so many different schools on islands. But it was right behind, there's a short area beyond, it was actually opposite, I believe, the Oklahoma. Okay. When the ships were here. In fact, they had to tear down the school in order to get the Oklahoma uprighted. They had to put in a lot of machinery and equipment to winch it up.
Okay. What was school like? Did you enjoy it?
Oh, I loved it. It was wonderful. We had Lahala mats. Everybody, there were like 2 or 3 classes to a room. There weren't that many students. And we were supposed to take a little rest out on the screened-in porch and play. We had wonderful swings and a huge area to run around in. It was a lot of fun, and what was especially nice was it ended at 1 o'clock in the afternoon because of the heat.
Yes, that's always nice.
Yeah, and it started at 8, which led to one problem one time because my sister and I walked along Battleship Row to get to school. And on our way, we got a little later start, and if they are doing taps on the ships, everybody's at attention. And we were, you know, raising the flag. And we were doing the same thing on our school grounds, and so of course we were late. But, yeah. And we used to wave to the sailors. They were friendly.
What were you doing on the morning of December 7th?
Well, my sister remembers it differently, but I'll tell you my story. In the early morning, the first person up on Sunday would get the comics, the paper, so we could read the comics. But this was a very special Sunday because my father had the feeling that we might be transferred soon. And we hadn't been to the aquarium, and he wanted to make sure we saw it. And so we had planned to have a pork roast for our meal in the middle of the day. And while we were in church here on the island, we would be able to have a roast cooked by the time we got back and then go into Honolulu. And so my job in making the stuffing was to chop the onions. So I chopped the onions and had the pile of them all ready and went to talk to my sister to say, okay, it's your turn, I get the comics. And she was arguing with me. And I was standing at the foot of a chaise lounge in which she was sitting, and it was against a wall, and the kitchen was behind her, so I'd just come through that door and come to the foot of the chaise. And I was standing here, and I wanted the comics, and I told her she had to get in and do her job.
It's kind of
hard. Her book she's reading.
Hard to see, but I send you a picture.
Louise May
and
Alcott. In her mind, remember, she's convinced that that's what she's doing. But you don't want to get a book from someone, you want the comics. I mean, that's the difference in age. So, at any rate, when I could hear some sounds, but it wasn't enough to interrupt our argument because we heard sounds every once in a while. And I heard Mother calling, so I headed right that way, whereas she had to turn around and head out. We'd go around and walk around that corner, and the school was down there. It was very quick. And then on the other side of it were the non-com officers' homes. And my sister and I had met two girls who played the piano and had a piano, and we hadn't brought a piano. So, you know, I was aware of booming sounds, but you heard booming sounds at other times, so it wasn't anything that really bothered me. But I heard my mother calling, "Girls, come." And I just turned right and went on down. Meantime, my sister had gotten up and she had to turn right to get out of the chaise, and she was looking down the airfield, the runways, and she could see all the fires at the other end. And then for some strange reason, she decided to go out the front door. Saw something, came back in, and my father had been in the first thing in the morning. He's reading the rest of the paper on the John. During your morning duty, that's what you call it. And so he was back where with all that marble and everything between, and he didn't hear us come in. And Mother and I went to look out that window because Mother had her bed up against her bedroom window. My dad snored, so she slept in her room. And so just as she and I had been looking out the window, and I'd seen one of the men shooting a machine gun on the deck, and Mother was saying they wouldn't be having target practice in here, and we're trying to figure out what's going on because we couldn't see anything. And then all of a sudden I heard Dad coming out of the bathroom, so I was really turned this way looking out the window. I should show you. Anyway, I'm in the bedroom. Mother and I are looking out. We're wondering what's happening. We kept hearing booming sounds, and I could see a man firing a machine gun on the deck of the ship out. I believe it was the Tennessee. And Sister came running in, and she said, there's fires down at the end of the airfield. And I just ran out the front door, and I saw a plane flying overhead, and it wasn't making any sound, and it had big red balls on its wings. And Dad said, "My God, it's the Japs. You girls know what you have to do."
And then 7th, in the surprise assault, American warplanes were caught on the ground and bombed. Most of them were disabled. That crippled our air opposition to the Japs, and their planes were able to swarm over the harbor and bomb and torpedo the warships there.
We'd been having air raid drills for some time, so we immediately, we both had our seersucker nightgowns and robes, and being 9 and 11, my sister turned 10 while we were on the ship. Her birthday was the 29th of December. We didn't have to worry about the immodesty of wearing a seersucker nightgown, so we gave up our robes later that day to be torn into strips to help clean the wounds of the injured men, especially the burned ones. When we came in, I saw this whole group of enlisted men, and I thought they were in their skivvies, white undershorts, but it turns out that they're white shorts, and I didn't know this until recently. They're told what the dress of the day will be, and it was white shorts. And they were all very quiet, and I was used to seeing enlisted men at ease, but being quiet. And all of a sudden I noticed how their skin, they had horrible swatches of skin, burned, blistered, and hanging. And it was, I didn't really understand at the time that they had swum through the burning oil at all, but it was rather overwhelming. And one man who appeared to be maybe in his 30s or 40s, I knew he was career because usually the sailors who weren't really young. And all of a sudden he started speaking. He said, "What on earth are these children doing in here seeing us looking like this?" And some other adult heard him and got us out of there. But and so I had given up my little seersucker robe, which I didn't need, and my sister had. And later when we left, we stepped over torn strips, and the strips had oil and what I now know is serum and probably flesh. And I looked at it then, I decided that minute as I stepped over to become a nurse, and I did. And we knew what we had to do. We had to go to the shelter. And on the way to the shelter, this house, there's a house back here that's closer to the road, and ours is right on the other road. A woman was calling to me from a window as I went by, and she had a little boy in front of her. and at the window, and he had an anxious face, and she did, and she wanted to know what was going on, and all I could say is, it's real, go to the shelter. And I think I said it 3 times, and she was puzzled, and Mother was yelling for me to catch up with them. So I caught up with Mother, and we started running towards, well, we were trying to get over to that street because we had to pass over that area by that house, and a plane suddenly flew over, and evidently the Japanese pilots were supposed to strafe anything they could after they dropped their bombs, and so he was shooting at us. I could hear the sound of the shells hitting the ground, but of course I was young enough, I didn't even realize what was happening, but now I understand. And we were lucky it wasn't a banyan tree, because we were able to go and hide under a tree, and he flew on. And we heard the men yelling to us from the back of the BOQ over here, because they were the kitchen crew. And they were all working in the kitchen. They happened to see us and hauled us up over the loading platform where trucks would back up with food for the kitchen. And so we were in there, and they put us, they wanted to put us under this long, to me it was sheet metal sink, and it also had a long drain board, a big sink and a long drain board, and it was on 3 sets of pipes that were about this big, which I didn't feel were very sturdy, because all this time there were bombs falling and things are rattling. And so Mother and Jody got down under it and obeyed, but I backed out, and I was standing. A rectangular thing, it was a flat sink, but that's where they did the dishes, with a long counter, and it was up against the wall, and it had like 6 overall pipes holding it up, and it was shaking because of all the concussions, and they wanted us to get under there because of the shells and so on. And so I got under there on this far end, and my mother and sister went under, stayed. I stayed there just a second because I figured I was better off if the thing didn't fall on me. It did not fall. So anyway, I was standing up, looking at them and looking at the one little window that faced this house on the old BLQ. And it was a little high window, it was high up. There was a young tree outside, so the top of the tree didn't quite get to the top of the window. And when the Arizona blew up, wow.
The Arizona to blow up.
Actually, when the Arizona blew up, Dad was just, all this has been said, you know, if you look at the time of when things happened, it all happened so quickly. But my dad always went out the same door from the dining room. But that day, for some reason or other, he went out this door. And when he went out this door, the Arizona blew up, and he was thrown flat on his face by it, and there was a huge steel plate from something in Arizona that went down 1.5 feet completely across the path outside the dining room door. So we're glad he took the kitchen door to go. And so then he got, before he could even get his car started, the Admiral came by and gave him a ride down there. So, I mean, everything happened so quickly. And I would say it was, you know, like 3 or 4, I mean, I was only arguing with her for just maybe 15 seconds. And then when your mother calls, you go. So anyway, that's a brief story. And then we stayed at the everybody's an adult here, and I think you've heard this part of the story. My sister and mother and I were in our nightgowns and robes. And we had what were called go-aheads. We slept on our feet when we went out. And there was this long period of nothing happening, and that was in between the 2 flight groups arriving. And all of a sudden, there was noise way up back here, and this was a pretty big square kitchen, but that was a Marine came bursting in with a bayonet on his gun, and you know, looking around to check out things. Now I don't know whether this is true or not, but Mother told us later that the Marine should never have come into the house, into the BOQ. He came in from the front door, and he worked his way through, and he found us in the kitchen. And the first thing he said was, "You ought to be ashamed of yourselves," to my mother, which she explained later on what he meant. We were 2 girls and a woman in the BOQ, and for people who don't know, BOQ stands for Bachelor's Officers' Quarters. So at any rate, he found out who we were and managed to get a pickup truck over And this was an interim period between the two, well, I guess it was, I can't think of what you call them, but the two groups that came in attacks. There was two separate attacks, two separate airplanes leaving at separate times from the carriers. And I remember the three of us being piled into the cab of the pickup truck, and I thought it was pretty amazing to have four people sitting. I think I was kind of down under, out of the way. But we got to the air raid shelter. And the first thing we walked into was the room that was our playroom, that we were going to serve lemonade and fudge when the war started, because we didn't understand what war was all about. We were going to entertain our guests because that was our place. And the boys had broken up our club the day before and brought the chairs and tables home to our house here, and all the stuff went to everybody's home. And I remember looking in there being so grateful the junk was gone, because it would have made less space for people to stand. And then we gradually moved in through the bombing had started again, and they're closed now because it allowed rats under the Admiral's house. But there was a big thing like this, really big, and it was very kind of rounded, and it had what we knew had to be a place to mount a gun. And we were sure it was used to fire from. So there was a rim to stand on because we could see the Solus, the hospital ship, because we're up on a hill there with the Red Cross and the white hospital ship being bombed by two separate Japanese planes. One bomb on one side, one on the other. And finally, the one on the right, after several passes and missing, the ship was shot down. And we were all screaming. It wasn't until I went to a football game when I was older that I realized we had all just cheered and screamed when we didn't even know how to do it. Fine. But according to our government records, the Japanese never tried to bomb the Solus. For those of us who saw it, know it happened, and maybe it's part of, well, we have to get along in the future sort of thing. And then there's more and more people kept coming in, so we got pushed further and further down, and I ended up in the final room, which was just the first thing you entered from the Admiral's Pier. And there had been a parapet in that area too, what we called a parapet. And when we came in, then we went into what I knew, and it's interesting because the Admiral who was on this post the last time I was here, his wife was wondering what one of the rooms had been down in there in the dungeon, and we had known that the servants lived in it. And on the day of the bombing, we ended up in there. And the building is kind of into the ground so that you have windows up here that are really at ground level. This Admiral's wife wanted to know the room, and then she said, well, there's a room over here. And I said, oh, that's the bathroom. And my mother was just amazing. There was no water, because one of the first bombs broke the supply that came to the island, and there were women who were throwing up, hysterical, and there was just one toilet and one sink with no water and a shower. I didn't really want to have to go in that room. I had to my one time, but I couldn't believe Mother made people calm, got everybody calmed down, and kept it looking neat and orderly. And I don't know how she did it, but it helped. I was very proud of her. I was really proud of her. So we were there for finally, and you'd listen to the whistling and you'd wonder if one of those bombs was really going to come down on top, but they all avoided us. So at any rate, when the bombing was over, we finally got out, we ended up being sent back to our quarters, and we walked from the Admiral's quarters, which is up at the end of the road there, and along here, and saw everything that we could saw. And of course, there was a lot of debris that you could pick up everywhere, and shells, shotgun shells. But we were walking along, and in the distance, I saw a Marine in front of our house, and I was walking with Mother and my sister, and he approached us and he said, Mrs. Zuber, there's a dead Japanese pilot on your front lawn. How do you feel about the girls seeing that? And she said, that's all right. So we walked on down, and I looked at him, and he was lying on the walkway, probably about 20 feet from the front door. And he was stretched out with his arms out and his legs out, and his head was aimed towards the Arizona. And he just had the littlest red spot on his chest. And I remember thinking, because I'd never seen anybody, well, it was a very different thing to see who'd been shot. I'd seen a dead grandfather in his bed, but this, and he was so peaceful looking and so young, but how could this little red spot, but it happened to be right over his heart, and I don't know whether he was bayoneted or shot.
It was coming in waves. In a chance hit, a bomb went down a smokestack of the Arizona and exploded the forward magazine. With the stricken vessel, we see the battleships Tennessee and West Virginia hit and on fire. There were 8 battleships in the harbor. All were damaged by the bomb and torpedo attack.
So much smoke.
5 battleships were damaged seriously enough to be useless for some time. This is the statement by the Navy a year after Pearl Harbor. Now the facts can no longer benefit the enemy and are made public. And these movie-tone pictures, made by cameraman Al Brick, are released by the Navy.
Two things happened that make it, to me, represent something that, well, it was supposed to happen that way. We had a play at school that we'd been working on for some time, and it was all about the culture of the islands, and it ended with the singing in complete Hawaiian of Aloha Oi, farewell. And it had to be canceled because for the first time ever that we had seen on the island, we had a tremendous rainfall the Friday before, the Thursday night before Thanksgiving weekend, and the water was too high for us to walk down to the school. Nobody could travel. It was waist high on us. It was incredible that how would water even build up, but it was there. And so school was closed, and because the following weekend was Thanksgiving and Friday was a holiday, the show ended up being on Friday the 5th. And it was wonderful. We learned so much about the islands, but the last thing we did, everybody in school was singing Aloha Oi. We never saw each other again. And because all different things happened, some people left by plane. At any rate, the next thing that happened was we'd been trying to break up the boat. Then we finally came home, and that's when the Oklahoma was still being drilled. They knew that there were men in there. They were able to save a number, but not nearly enough. And at night it was really hard to fall asleep because you knew there were men inside that upside down ship, and you knew the lights.
That's where the Missouri is now. That's where the Oklahoma was.
Yeah.
Say that again.
Yeah.
The Oklahoma's where the Missouri is now.
Yeah, and I'm
East of
glad
the
you
Oklahoma.
pointed it out because I wasn't sure exactly. But anyway, we could see it from our house, and because there were no shrubs or trees, you could see the men working. But of course, the light was shielded from going up above, and I just was so hard to think that there were men. And Katrina put something on Facebook.
Battleship Maryland on fire and the Oklahoma has capsized. And in the bomb and torpedo attack, high explosive hit the West Virginia. Damaged and the capsized Oklahoma. Battleships were moored at docks in pairs, and the outer ones were torpedoed. The Nevada, attacked while steaming to leave harbor, was beached.
They did get some men out while we were there, but there were a lot that were unable to get out. And then because we were really short of water and all kinds of sanitation, some of us were able to move and live in with families in Honolulu where we knew them. And then I turned around to look at the Arizona, which was horribly flame smoke. The flag and the part of the ship that would have had the flag on it was gone, and it was really brilliant flames still, and terrible black smoke just pouring out. And our flag was flying, and it was perfectly fine. It was red, white, and blue, and looked like it was new, and it was, because it was on a different line. Somebody had put a line from here up to something else. And there was no crane around, and I couldn't figure out how somebody had gotten that, and it was odd at an angle, the line that carried it from. How did that that line get where it was? To me, I thought, wow, I know we're going to win the war when we have people like that on our side, you know. But I looked at that and took a lot of bravery, and I just knew we were going to win the war, because that's the kind of people we are, and we did. So I never ever thought about not winning the war. And then
the repair work begins. Damaged airplanes first. Many are quickly put into shape again, and air replacements arrive. The plane losses are made good in a few days. The Pearl Harbor story begins with havoc and continues with an epic of replacement and repair. Damaged battleships are repaired. The West Virginia, the Tennessee in the background. An immense amount of work is required and is provided. Other ships are salvaged and will steam forth to fight again. The Nevada, expert salvage to put that sea giant in action once more. And the West Virginia is being raised from the bottom of the shallow harbor. The saving of the battleships is like a miracle. And here we see battleships coming back, as the Japs thought they never would come back. The California is raised. Torpedo explosions cause ships to settle to the bottom. Water is pumped out to float the mighty craft. And a drama of refloating. The mine layer, Oglala. She sank below the surface. And now pontoons bring her up. And you see the vessel emerge and right herself. A reappearance after weeks below the water. Like a symbol of the repair of the harm done by the enemy. West Virginia has now been salvaged to a point where she is ready to go to the dry dock for
And so we went to bed. The next morning, Mother hadn't come. They left for church, and we had to stay home, of course, in case the phone rang. And the phone did ring, and it was a male voice asking us to have the officer call a certain number, and he did, and we found out that we were going to be put right on the Lurleen right then and there. And so we sailed off on Christmas Day. And it was quite a different trip back than it had been going over. It was a lot of fun going over, but going back, it was rough. They had to beware of submarines, and they couldn't tell us where we were going. Of course, nobody could have a radio, and it wouldn't work anyway out in the middle of the ocean back then. And so we knew it was either going to be Bremerton, Washington, San Francisco, and I can't think of the area down Wilmington, I think it is in Southern California, and which is where we originally boarded the ship when we went over. And we suddenly saw the Golden Gate, and we were so thrilled. And they did everything by alphabet. The Zumwalts left the ship last. We left it next to the last. It was a long day. That's a terrible thing to be with a Zuber, but there was always a Zumwalt somewhere. And to end the story, Mother had us looking very nice because she didn't want to go. She knew the war was going to happen, and my sister saw her packing up the cape and skirts that we'd worn over, and so she had them, and she had a little thing of water to wash our faces. And we were asked to go down the gangplank and be interviewed by Movietone News, and which we were done. And Mother said a few words which were very innocuous to me, but evidently she must have said something the government didn't want heard, so we were just shown in a silent feature. And my dad never saw it, we never saw it, but my future husband saw it. I happened to be telling him about this, and he said, "I saw that. Did your sister have," and he described what she was holding. Yes. So that was a miracle. But now I realize that I had the best of all worlds. Now I live in a small town, and instead of just having one sister, I have 3 children who have 11 grandchildren, and two of my children live in town with 7 of my grandchildren, and now 4 are married, and I have 6 great-grandchildren. And except for the ones that are in Arizona and Utah, all of them are close by. So I thought, I've got that family I always wanted and I belong. So that's it.
Okay.
That's the end of the story.